Greetings, dear friends. Operational situation at the front on the 5th of February. We will start with you, of course, of the Skopsko-Limansky direction, the Kopensky-Satovsky section of the front, AVDEEVKA and Starch. So, yesterday we said that the situation remains under clarification, and it takes about 24 hours to see the full picture, or even 48 hours. To date, we can say that in the direction of AVDEEVKA, the positional nature of the fighting remains without any changes. At the same time, in the area of AVDEEVKA and Starch itself, the enemy is increasing pressure, as I wrote in my telegram, because they have transferred and brought fresh reserves into battle, that is, they are naturally trying to reverse the course of events in this sector of the front, not to let it freeze, put it into positivity, not to let it reach parity. Therefore, very heavy fighting continues on this sector of the front, both west of AVDEEVKA and south AVDEEVKA west of Starch. Well, conditionally we will talk in the direction of Sandy. There is also activity of Russian troops in neighboring areas, but it has a classic positional character, with less pressure. This is, for example, Kazemovka-Novoselivskaya, a section of the front in the direction of Berestovolia, and in the direction of Kislovka-Kotlyarovka-Ivanivka. But again, this is a positional nature of the fighting. The main pressure we have is west of AVDEEVKA and south AVDEEVKA west of Starch. To date, the situation of fighting in the gray zone remains without confident control from the enemy, because from time to time the APU enters the gray zone, manages to drink, does not allow the Russian troops to gain a foothold. But still, the pressure remains high, and the key role, as the Russian command suggests, should be played by the reserves brought into battle. Lyman direction. Terny-Yampolovka. So, we said on previous broadcasts that the enemy is shifting the main blow from the area of the Krug beam to the Laptev Yar, as well as the near Yar, the far Yar. Footage from our AFU fighters was published yesterday. So, the footage of the defeat of 3 armored vehicles, 1 tank, and 2 armored vehicles, and in general, the enemy managed to enter the territory of Yaro near, as we see. Well, the extreme points we have are approximately north of the circled area, that is, this is exactly where they were moving. A gray area has been added. They did not allow the AFU to gain a foothold again for the Russian troops, but as we see, they are already coming in. Armored vehicles are there, and will actually increase pressure, based on the fact that their northern flank is relatively stable now. They managed to hold it, and moreover, the main fighting in our country is shifting to the center of Yar Laptev, that is within the gray zone. Therefore, they are now trying to push from several directions, as we see, not only from east to west, but also as armored vehicles drove in from south to north. That is, from several directions, the APU's defense is probed in this area. Therefore, a gray area has been added. Along the Serebryansky forest Bologorovka without any changes, but along the Seversky direction as a whole, clarifications have been added between Vizly and the railway. It means that the footage was published again by the AFU of a strike on one of the mainstays. He was in the gray zone. This is a clarification of those positions that the enemy took even when he occupied the settlement of Vesele. Therefore, this is up to clarification, let's say so. But if there is activity on the part of Russian troops in this area, but it now has a positional character, not so much as it was before. Although there is activity not only in this sector of the front, there is also activity in the disputed area, both east and northeast of the settlement, but again it has a positional character. No significant changes were recorded in the Bakhmut direction. Positional fighting continues. At the same time, there is further activity. Another video was posted. We added a small section of the gray zone of eastern Andreevka, and in principle, active hostilities continue with varying success, both to the east and northeast of Andreevka, near the Stavka Cascade, because the APU also operates behind the Stavka Cascade, based on those shots that are published, but without significant, I repeat, changes. The AVDEEVKA direction is the hottest point on the front line today. We will start from the northern flank. On the northern flank, despite all the negative news that exists today, there is also a positive moment. There it was possible to squeeze out Russian troops from the forest belt in a section up to 1.8 kilometers wide, to a depth of 300 meters, so they were not allowed to gain a foothold, and for Russian troops, as you remember, attempts to advance and gain a foothold at the Zarya Garden Partnership were key in this sector of the front, because securing in the area of the Tachmash Garden Partnership gave them the opportunity to increase pressure on the standard, and it was assumed that in this way they would get, if they enter and gain a foothold in the territory of Don, more advantageous flanking positions, then they would be able to attack already on Burdik with larger forces by passing the standard. We managed to stabilize the situation, I repeat, and squeeze it out from a number of positions. But now for the enemy, as we see, the main task is to advance in AVDEEVKA. Well, we actually go to AVDEEVKA itself. Here, the enemy managed to advance on a front section up to 3 to 9 kilometers wide to a depth of 700 meters. If we are talking about AVDEEVKA itself, and in the area of forest belts that are located south of Izli, the current situation is as follows. We will start not from AVDEEVKA itself, but from the site of the southwestern Kamenka. So, the enemy managed to completely occupy the territory of the Garden Association Rainbow. In principle, they had partial success, as you remember, in this sector of the front, and naturally, the main goal for them is the dominant height east of the sand pit. They are betting on it. And accordingly, it is also a distraction when you are approaching a key point. Naturally, everything is being done on our part to prevent the enemy from gaining another dominant height by Russian troops. As for the south of Izli, this is more of a stabilization of the front, because you need to understand that, since the enemy advanced at the Garden Association, it means Rainbow taking control of it, and taking the rest of the AVDEEVKA Garden Association. Naturally there was a question of supplying forest belts, so they naturally retreated to more advantageous positions of the Apu, so as not to be surrounded, which is logical in principle. So the enemy took these positions. As for AVDEEVKA, now we move on. We talked with you yesterday, commented on the words of military commander Tsoplyenko, Butusev. They reported a critical situation, a difficult situation, that the enemy was advancing through the city. Well, actually, the heavy city battles began. And we also said yesterday that they are not only pressing south of the Garden Association, but also talked about sewage treatment plants. If anyone watched the previous two broadcasts, yesterday's, it means that they are pressing in the south direction, and here to move to the neighboring Garden Association, and accordingly, to break through to the road, about 0542. But it's too early to talk about it. The main goal is to at least get as close to it as possible. Unfortunately, the enemy has partial success in advancing in this area. And there are again, urban battles, very difficult, and at the same time, they are attacking again not from one direction, as they said yesterday, from two directions on this sector of the front, in order to disperse our forces as much as possible now, and moreover, they are also introducing fresh reserves, not just rotates troops, but introduces additional forces in order to increase pressure. At the same time, our fighters from the field report that the number of airstrikes with bombs that we have had there for the last few days, it significantly exceeds the previous periods when we stated that 50 air bomb strikes were counted per day. And there was even one of the statements of the official fighters that there were about 80 air bomb attacks on AVDEEVKA itself. This is very much. In fact, this is a colossal amount, and actually, the enemy increases, which naturally complicates the defense. It is the advantage in tactical aviation. Therefore, it is also necessary to understand. Now, we have the main fighting in three areas. If we are talking about the position of Severnaya AVDEEVKA, the first section is also from the treatment facilities. That is, they descended, secured themselves south of the treatment facilities, and tried to break through to the Garden Association. That is, approximately this area, where there are basements where you can gain a foothold. One time. The second direction is from AVDEEVKA, in the direction of the supply road section 00542. Very heavy fighting is going on, while the enemy has a stable flanking position, including due to previously occupied territories, and a cascade of bets in case of a counterattack. Well, actually a difficult area for a counterattack, we will speak directly. Well, the third section, the third direction is to the south and southeast of the Garden Association. Also go to the territory of AVDEEVKA itself, or simply put, go to the shore of a sand pit. That is, take approximately this area, that is south of the southeast, in order to completely close the probability that there may be flanking counterattack. There is such a moment, so very heavy fighting continues. It's too early to make any forecasts for this section of the front, because you understand the situation yourself. On the southern flank. So here, the pressure does not subside from the enemy, but it is possible to contain it. And if the situation on the southern flank is relatively stabilized, parity has been achieved. Unfortunately, there is no way to dislodge Russian troops because they are also transferring additional forces, and this is a key area for them. And seeing how the battles in the Bakhmut direction have turned into positional, that is, they have a positional character. And we said earlier a few weeks ago that there is information that one of the directions will move to positionality. I assumed that it would be Skolomenskaya, but it turned out to be just the same Bakhmutskaya. They transferred experienced forces to the AVDEEVKA direction. This also needs to be understood. And in the Bakhmut direction, they made a very big bet on promotion at the expense of these forces. There is such a moment, so we have managed to stabilize new advances of Russian troops in this sector of the front. At the same time, the activity, I repeat, is very high in fact. Not only are we talking about the south of AVDEEVKA, or the area of the Tsarskaya Okhota complex. There are also attempts in the direction of Chebarashka to bypass these positions from the Opitny district, and in general, let's say, there is high activity between Opitny and Vodiane. Moreover, yesterday footage of a strike on Russian armored vehicles in the Vodiane area was published, that is, he just again engaged in transferring it in order to activate this section of the front as much as possible. But, thanks to the effective work of aerial reconnaissance, it was possible to prevent the Russian troops from allowing this opportunity. There is such a moment. Moving on. May Day. Yesterday, we talked a lot about it on the daytime, on the evening broadcast, that the actual fighting along Voroshilev Street, that they are shifting in a northerly direction. Well, today there is an adjustment according to the situation. Here, the enemy managed to advance on a front section up to 570 meters wide, to a depth of 730 meters. Active fighting continues along the street. What we just talked about yesterday with you is that the main bet is now on Persha Travneva Street, not so much on Voroshilev. It is Persha Travnevo. Well, in fact, active hostilities continue. At the same time, there is some activity east of Novelsky, south of Pervomaysky, which means approximately in this area. It has a positional character, but it is primarily a distracting maneuver of the enemy, in order to provide an opportunity to attack Pervomayskaya with a wider coverage, and accordingly disperse the forces of the armed forces of Ukraine in this sector of the front. Including the attacks that were planned from Vodiane, the activity in general in the Vodiane area of the Russian troops, it is aimed at dispersing our forces. This is also by no means to be forgotten. Therefore, the difficult situation remains. In the Kurikovsky direction, active hostilities continue in the area of the veins of the Trudovskaya mine shaft, as well as along the forest belts northwest of Marenka, and positional fighting in the eastern part of Georgievka. There, the enemy's advance is not fixed at all. It is possible to restrain him without any changes. Therefore, now the Russian troops have made first of all attempts, they managed to knock them out somewhere, but not to their original positions, yes. To prevent them from gaining a foothold within the gray zone, but they are trying to get around now, and are probing already today. We are talking not only to forest belts that go in the north direction, but also in general north of the pigsty. So there is some activity in the north direction. It is naturally now aimed at conducting reconnaissance by combat, which positions, how quickly the APU reacts promptly on this sector of the front. But actually, if we said before that it was very important for them to take 3 T-shaped intersections, that is, we have one north of the eastern part of Pervomaysky, and the second or third approximately in this area. Now we are talking about the fact that they generally want to try to align the front line along these 2 forest belts. Therefore, the fighting continues in this sector of the front. Novomikhailivka without any changes. The Great Novoselkov direction, Orekhovsky section of the front without any changes. And on the markets, active hostilities continue on the part of Russian troops, attacks continue. Somewhere they have a positional character, somewhere there is a dynamic situation on a number of points on the map, but all this remains within the gray zone. It cannot be said that they now have the opportunity, what we talked about there 2 months ago, as they assumed, to cut our forces into 2 and in the locality. There are actually attacks from the forest area. And so, they are betting on this, but not now the main blow, but as we have talked with you before, they are guided by Zelenka. And I will comment on one more point. So as you remember, China sold them moto all-terrain vehicles, and they used them initially on this sector of the front. Naturally, they are already being used all over the front. So, these all-terrain vehicles are equipped with smoke screens, that is to do. And in general, a very big bet is placed on the fact that there will be a thicker green. It still exists in these forests, but there, for the most part, you understand, the pines remain at the near points. A big bet, of course, for about May is being made, in order for the greenery plus smoke screens, plus, to react as quickly as possible mobile through the forest, and then try to implement your plan. Stabilize the situation in this sector of the front. Therefore, active hostilities continue on the part of the enemy, but without any changes. This is the situation we have today at the front. On the evening broadcast, I will already analyze the news fund with you in more detail. Well, I will answer your comments. I will spend about 15 or 20 minutes answering your questions about the chat. Until the evening broadcast.